On the night of July 14th, 1850, in the Central Valley of California, just 7 weeks after California entered the Union as a free state, 56 enslaved people vanished simultaneously from farms, mines, and households within a 50-mile radius of Sacramento. 12 coordinated escape routes, 12 perfect checkmates against the slave system. Every movement calculated months in advance, every piece positioned with infinite patience, every play executed with lethal perfection. The slave catchers never found a single fugitive. The patrols followed tracks that ended in rivers, trails that divided into traps, false clues planted with mastery. It was as if 56 people had evaporated from the face of the earth. But these escapes didn't happen by accident. They were orchestrated by a 34-year-old enslaved woman named Prudence, who for 18 months had posed as the most obedient domestic slave in Sacramento while building something no slaveholder ever imagined possible. An underground liberation network operating in the heart of the new free state. Her secret. Prudence wasn't just a domestic slave. She was an exceptional chess player, taught in secret by an abolitionist when she was a child in Georgia, and possessed a photographic memory capable of mapping entire geographies, memorizing patrol patterns, and calculating success probabilities with mathematical precision. More importantly, she saw people as pieces on a giant chessboard, where every movement created new possibilities for freedom. For 18 months, between January 1849 and July 1850, the owners of mines and farms in California's Central Valley believed Prudence was simply an exceptionally obedient and silent domestic slave. Born on a cotton plantation in Georgia, she cooked, cleaned, and sewed without ever raising her eyes. Her master, Thurston Blackwood, who had brought her illegally to Sacramento during the gold rush, frequently praised her for her exemplary docility and even allowed her to circulate through the city doing shopping, a rare privilege. But Prudence wasn't being docile. She was studying. Every trip to the market was reconnaissance. Every conversation overheard was intelligence. Every smile of submission masked calculations that would have terrified her oppressors. This is the story of the chess queen of California, the enslaved woman who transformed patience into power, strategy into salvation, and intelligence into freedom. But it all began 7 months earlier, in December 1849, when Master Thurston Blackwood made the mistake that would transform his obedient slave into the greatest threat to California's illegal slave system. Sacramento, in 1849, was a city of contradictions and chaos. The gold rush had transformed a quiet settlement into a roaring boomtown of 30,000 souls, all desperate for fortune. Tents and wooden shacks lined muddy streets. Ships abandoned in the harbor rotted as their crews fled to the goldfields. The air smelled of sawdust, horse manure, wood smoke, and dreams. The city existed in legal twilight. California hadn't yet entered the Union, and the question of slavery burned hotter than the forge fires in the blacksmith shops. Southern miners brought slaves illegally, calling them servants under contract. The territorial government looked the other way. Money talked louder than morality. Thurston Blackwood had arrived in Sacramento in March 1848, 3 months before James Marshall's discovery at Sutter's Mill sparked the gold fever. A plantation owner from Charleston, South Carolina, Blackwood possessed the foresight to see that California's real wealth wouldn't come from panning rivers, but from supplying the miners with food, equipment, and services. He brought 20 enslaved people with him, including Prudence and her 8-year-old daughter Grace, claiming they were indentured servants who had voluntarily agreed to work for him. It was a transparent lie. But in a territory where sheriffs were elected by men who believed in manifest destiny and white supremacy, lies became law. Blackwood established a large farm 15 miles south of Sacramento, in the fertile valley near the American River. 300 acres of wheat and vegetables, orchards of fruit trees, livestock. A main house built in the Southern style, with white columns that looked absurd against the California landscape. Slave quarters, though he called them workers' housing, identical to those he'd owned in Charleston. The 20 enslaved people worked the same brutal hours they had in South Carolina. The same whip cracked, the same chains rattled. The only difference was the California sun, hotter and drier than the humid Georgia summers Prudence remembered from childhood. Prudence was 34 years old in 1849. Medium height, slim build, skin the color of polished mahogany. Her face revealed nothing, a mask perfected over decades of survival. Brown eyes that seemed downcast but missed nothing, hands scarred from cooking fires and lye soap. A small brand on her left shoulder, hidden under her dress, marked her as Blackwood property, but Prudence's most valuable asset was invisible: her mind. She had been born on a cotton plantation in Macon, Georgia, in 1815. Her mother, Patience, had been a house slave who taught Prudence to read in secret, using a tattered Bible stolen from the master's library. Reading was forbidden for slaves in Georgia, punishable by 50 lashes or sale, but Patience believed literacy was survival. When Prudence was 11 years old, something extraordinary happened. The plantation owner's youngest son, Timothy Whitfield, returned from Harvard a committed abolitionist. To his father's horror, the 22-year-old had joined the American Anti-Slavery Society and believed slavery was America's original sin. Timothy couldn't free the plantation's slaves. His father controlled the property, but he could educate them. In secret, in the plantation's abandoned smokehouse, Timothy taught 6 enslaved children to read, write, and think critically. And he taught Prudence something else: chess. Timothy had been a chess champion at Harvard. He saw in 11-year-old Prudence an intellect that rivaled any white scholar he'd known. For 3 years, until Timothy's father discovered the secret school and disowned his son, Prudence learned the game. She became exceptional. Timothy told her she could beat anyone in Georgia if given the chance. More importantly, he taught her that chess was more than a game. It was a model for understanding power, strategy, and patience. Every piece had value. Every position created opportunities. Every sacrifice could lead to victory. "The queen is the most powerful piece," Timothy told her during their last lesson before his father sent him away forever. "She moves in all directions. She protects the king but operates independently. She's worth more than any other piece except the king himself. Remember that, Prudence. In life, as in chess, patience and strategy defeat brute force." Prudence never forgot. When she was 17, the Whitfield plantation fell into debt. Prudence was sold to a slave trader who transported her to Charleston, separating her forever from her mother. She spent the next decade working as a house slave for various Charleston families, learning to cook, sew, and maintain the perfect mask of obedience that kept masters from seeing the mind working beneath. At 28, she was sold to Thurston Blackwood. Within a year, she gave birth to Grace, fathered by one of Blackwood's overseers in an encounter Prudence never spoke of. Grace became the center of Prudence's universe, her reason to survive, her reason to smile, her reason to hope. When Blackwood announced in 1848 that he was moving to California and taking 20 slaves with him, including Prudence and 6-year-old Grace, Prudence saw opportunity. California was far from the Deep South. The legal situation was unclear, and California would likely become a free state soon. Everyone said so. If she could survive long enough, Grace might grow up free. The journey west took 5 months. 20 enslaved people, Blackwood's family and 3 overseers, traveled by ship around Cape Horn, then north to San Francisco, and finally by riverboat to Sacramento. During that journey, Prudence observed everything: coastlines, currents, distances, landmarks. Her photographic memory catalogued it all. When they arrived in California, Prudence was assigned to work in Blackwood's house as cook and housekeeper. Grace helped in the kitchen and learned to sew. The work was brutal, the hours endless, but Prudence maintained her mask, obedient, silent, invisible, but she was neither silent nor invisible in her mind. Every day, Prudence mapped the geography of Sacramento and the surrounding valley. She memorized which roads led north to Oregon Territory, east to the mountains, west to San Francisco, south to Mexico. She noted which farms held enslaved people, which white men spoke quietly against slavery, which shops served free black people, which churches might hide runaways. She listened to every conversation in Blackwood's house. The master often entertained other Southern transplants, men who complained about California's impending admission as a free state. They spoke freely in front of Prudence. Believing slaves couldn't understand complex political discussions, they were wrong. Prudence learned that California would likely enter the Union in September 1850 as a free state under the Compromise of 1850. She learned that some slaveholders planned to circumvent the law by calling their slaves apprentices or indentured servants. She learned that others planned to flee to Texas or back to the South before freedom became law, and she learned that enslaved people throughout the valley were desperate. 40 or 50 people held in illegal bondage, most brought during the gold rush, all trapped in legal limbo, all terrified their masters would sell them south before California became free. Prudence began to form a plan. It started simply. On her shopping trips to Sacramento, Prudence made contact with other enslaved people. A man named Solomon, who worked in a blacksmith shop. A woman named Dinah, who cleaned a boarding house. A young man named Moses, who hauled freight at the docks. Each conversation was brief, coded, careful. "Do you play chess?" Prudence would ask. If they answered yes, even if they'd never touched a chess piece in their lives, it meant they wanted freedom. It meant they were willing to risk everything. By June 1849, Prudence had identified 23 enslaved people in Sacramento and the surrounding valley who wanted to run. 23 pieces on her chessboard, 23 lives depending on her strategy. But Prudence couldn't act yet. Running before California became a free state meant they'd be fugitives everywhere they went. Oregon Territory allowed slavery. Nevada Territory was controlled by slaveholders. Mexico was distant and dangerous. The Underground Railroad didn't operate this far west. No, Prudence realized, she had to wait for California to become free. Wait until the law was on their side, even if enforcement would be weak. Wait until she could plan not just escapes, but sustainable freedom. Patience, her mother had always said, was the foundation of survival. So Prudence waited, and while she waited, she planned. Every chess game begins with an opening strategy. Prudence spent 7 months in 1849 developing hers. But everything changed on December 7th, 1849. It was a cold morning, rare for California. Frost touched the ground. Prudence was preparing breakfast in the kitchen when she heard voices in the main house. Loud voices. A stranger's voice she didn't recognize. She moved silently to the doorway, staying in shadow, listening. The stranger was a miner named Josiah Pemberton, a rough man with a scarred face and tobacco-stained beard. He'd struck gold in the American River, he boasted, 30 pounds of gold dust in 6 months. Now he was heading north to the Trinity River, where even richer deposits had been discovered. "I need workers," Pemberton said, "strong ones. I'll pay well." "I don't sell my property lightly," Blackwood replied. But Prudence heard calculation in his voice. $2,000, Pemberton said. "Gold for 2 workers." $2,000 was an enormous sum. Prudence's heart began to race. Which 2 workers? "I'll consider it," Blackwood said. "Let me show you the field hands." The men walked outside. Prudence followed at a distance, still in her kitchen apron, appearing to work on morning chores. Pemberton examined the men working in the wheat field. He rejected most. Too old, too weak, wrong temperament. Then he saw someone else. Grace, 8 years old, helping her mother carry firewood to the kitchen. Small for her age, but strong, with her mother's intelligent eyes and quick movements. What about that one? Pemberton pointed. Prudence's blood turned to ice. That's a child, Blackwood said, surprised. Children grow, Pemberton said, and girls work as hard as boys in the goldfields. Cooking, washing, hauling, I'll train her. 2,000 for her and 1 field hand. She's the cook's daughter, Blackwood said slowly. Prudence wanted to scream, run, grab Grace and run until her legs gave out. But she stood frozen, still holding firewood, her face a perfect mask. Blackwood looked at Prudence. For a moment, just one moment, something like conscience flickered in his eyes. Then it died. 3,000, Blackwood said. Gold. And you take them today. Pemberton nodded. Done. The world tilted. Prudence's vision blurred. She heard nothing but the roaring of blood in her ears. She watched as Blackwood called over a field hand named Jupiter, a strong young man of 22. She watched as he walked to Grace, still carrying firewood, oblivious. Grace, Blackwood said gently, like he was offering her candy. You're going on a trip with this gentleman. Go say goodbye to your mother. Grace looked confused. Then she saw Prudence's face and understood. The child ran, straight into Prudence's arms. Mama, no, Mama, please. Prudence held her daughter, feeling Grace's small body shaking. She wanted to speak, but couldn't find words. What could she say? It's going to be all right. It wasn't. I'll find you. How? Don't be scared. Terror was the only sane response. Pemberton walked over, impatient. Come on, girl, we're losing daylight. Grace clung tighter. Mama, don't let him take me. Prudence finally found her voice. Master Blackwood, please. She's just a child. Please don't do this. It was the first time in 18 months she had begged for anything, the first time she'd dropped her mask. Blackwood looked away. Business is business, Prudence. You'll have other children. Other children, as if Grace was a crop that could be replanted. Pemberton grabbed Grace's arm. The child screamed. Prudence lunged forward, but Blackwood's overseer, a brutal man named Pike, grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. Don't make this harder, Pike hissed in her ear. Prudence watched as Pemberton dragged Grace to his wagon. The child fought, screaming, reaching for her mother. Jupiter was already tied in the wagon bed, his face a mask of resignation. Grace was small enough that Pemberton just lifted her and threw her in. He tied her wrists to the wagon side. The child was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Mama! Mama! Prudence stopped struggling. She stood perfectly still, Pike still holding her, and looked directly at her daughter. She needed Grace to see her face one last time, needed Grace to remember that her mother was strong. Grace, Prudence said, her voice somehow steady, remember what I taught you. Remember who you are. Remember your name, Grace Patience Freeman. Freeman, not Blackwood's property. Freeman. Free. It was the most dangerous thing Prudence had ever said in front of white men. Blackwood stared at her, shocked. Pike's grip tightened painfully, but Pemberton just laughed. Freeman? Girl's got spirit. I'll give her that. He climbed into the wagon and snapped the reins. The wagon rolled away. Grace's screams faded into the distance. Prudence stood in the yard, Pike still holding her, watching until the wagon disappeared around a bend in the road. Then Pike released her. Prudence didn't move. She stood in the yard as the sun rose higher, as the frost melted, as the other enslaved people went back to work, casting sympathetic glances, but saying nothing. Blackwood walked past her into the house. Get back to work, Prudence. Breakfast won't cook itself. Prudence walked to the kitchen. Her hands moved automatically, starting the fire, mixing cornmeal, slicing bacon. Her face remained a mask, but inside, everything had changed. The woman who had entered the kitchen that morning, patient, strategic, willing to wait for California statehood, was gone. The woman who stood at the stove now was something else entirely. For 18 months, Prudence had planned for gradual, careful liberation after California became free. She'd been thinking like a chess player, positioning pieces for a long game. Now she realized she'd been thinking wrong. This wasn't chess. Chess was a gentleman's game, with rules both players agreed to follow. Slavery had no rules. Masters could break any promise, destroy any family, commit any atrocity without consequence. You couldn't win a chess game against an opponent who flipped the board whenever they were losing. But you could win by changing the game entirely. Prudence looked down at her hands, covered in cornmeal. These hands had cooked thousands of meals for Blackwood and his family. These hands had served them with perfect obedience for 18 months. These hands could do other things. That night, after the main house went dark, Prudence sat alone in her small room in the slave quarters. She lit a single candle and pulled out something she'd hidden under a loose floorboard, a small leather pouch Timothy Whitfield had given her 23 years ago, containing a chess set carved from wood. She hadn't touched it in years. It was too dangerous to be caught with it, but tonight she needed to see the pieces. Prudence laid them out on the floor, 32 pieces, 2 kingdoms locked in eternal combat. She picked up the Black Queen and held it up to the candlelight. Timothy had been wrong about one thing. The Queen wasn't the most powerful piece because she could move in all directions. The Queen was powerful because she was willing to sacrifice herself for victory. Checkmate often required the Queen to die. Prudence was willing to die, but not before she moved every piece on her board to safety. Not before she checkmated every master who thought he owned human beings like livestock. She would free Grace. She would free everyone she could reach. And she would do it not by waiting for California statehood, but by exploiting the chaos of the gold rush, the legal confusion of territorial law, and the arrogance of men who believed enslaved people were too stupid to organize resistance. Prudence closed her eyes and began to calculate. Not one escape. 12. Simultaneous, different directions, overwhelming the slave catcher's ability to pursue. She would need 7 months to plan it properly, 7 months to position every piece, 7 months to build something that had never existed in California, an underground railroad to nowhere and everywhere at once. The game had changed. The board was larger than Prudence had imagined. The stakes were life and death. But Prudence had been preparing for this game her entire life. She picked up the White King and smiled coldly. "Your move, Master Blackwood," she whispered to the knight. The following morning, Prudence returned to her mask of perfect obedience. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, smiled when spoken to, kept her eyes downcast. But everything had changed. On her next shopping trip to Sacramento, 3 days after Grace was taken, Prudence made contact with Solomon at the blacksmith shop. Solomon was 45 years old, born free in Pennsylvania, captured by slave catchers at age 20 and sold into bondage. 25 years of slavery hadn't broken his spirit, only sharpened it into something hard and dangerous. "I need you to gather everyone," Prudence said quietly, pretending to examine horseshoes while Solomon's master argued with a customer. "Everyone who answered yes to my question." "When?" Solomon asked, not looking at her, hammering iron as he spoke. "Tomorrow night, the old mill by the river, midnight." "What's changed?" "Everything," Prudence said. "We're not waiting anymore." Solomon glanced at her just once. He saw something in her face that made him nod immediately. The next night, 19 enslaved people gathered in the abandoned mill 3 miles outside Sacramento. The building had burned months earlier, leaving only stone walls and charred beams. It was isolated, dangerous, and perfect. They arrived in ones and twos, slipping away from quarters when masters slept, risking brutal punishment if caught. Each person carried the same desperation, the same calculation that death was preferable to this life. Prudence arrived last, moving through darkness like smoke. The 19 looked at her expectantly. Some she knew well: Solomon, Dinah, Moses. Others she'd only spoken to briefly. A few were strangers brought by friends. Prudence studied each face. These were her pieces, her army, her responsibility. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Sound carried at night, and slave patrols roamed the roads. "I know the risk you took to be here. I know what we'll all face if we're caught. So before I say anything else, anyone who wants to leave, leave now. No judgment, no shame." Nobody moved. Prudence nodded slowly. "Good. Then let me tell you what we're going to do." She knelt and used a stick to draw in the ash-covered floor, a rough map of the Sacramento Valley, the American River to the east, the Sacramento River to the west, the city between them, the roads leading north, south, east, and west. "How many of you know chess?" she asked. 3 hands rose: Solomon, a woman named Harriet, and a young man named Caesar. "Chess is about thinking 12 moves ahead," Prudence explained. "It's about sacrifice and strategy. It's about using your opponent's assumptions against them. And most importantly, it's about understanding that every piece has value, but not every piece has the same role." She drew lines on the map. One route heading north toward Oregon Territory, one heading east into the Sierra Nevada foothills, one heading west toward San Francisco, one heading south toward San Jose. "Our masters think we're property. They think we can't organize, can't plan, can't think strategically. They're wrong. We're going to use their arrogance to destroy them." "How?" Dinah asked. She was 32, brought to California from Louisiana, separated from her husband and 3 children. Her eyes burned with a rage that matched Prudence's. "In 7 months, on the night of July 14th, 1850, we're all going to disappear," Prudence said. "Not just us 19, everyone we can reach, every enslaved person in this valley who wants freedom, and we're going to disappear in 12 different directions simultaneously." Silence. Then Moses, a young man of 19 who worked at the docks, spoke up. "They'll hunt us, they'll send slave catchers and dogs, and—" "They'll try," Prudence interrupted. "But slave catchers can only follow one trail at a time. If 12 groups leave in 12 directions on the same night, they have to choose which trails to follow. And while they're chasing some groups, the others get away." "Where do we go?" asked a woman named Rose, a field hand in her 20s. "California's about to be a free state, but Oregon Territory allows slavery. Nevada's controlled by Southern sympathizers. Mexico's 600 miles away. There's no underground railroad out here. Where do we go?" It was the question Prudence had spent 3 sleepless nights answering. "We go everywhere and nowhere," she said. "Some groups head to San Francisco, where there's already a small, free black community and abolitionist churches that will hide people. Some groups head into the mountains, where there are isolated mining camps desperate for workers who'll pay cash and ask no questions. Some groups head south to Monterey or San Jose, cities with old Spanish families who hate the American slaveholders. And some groups disappear into the Central Valley itself, hiding in plain sight as free blacks who just arrived from the east." "That's insane," Solomon said, but his tone wasn't critical. It was impressed. "You're talking about creating a dozen different escape routes simultaneously, all requiring safe houses, supplies, guides, and—" "Yes," Prudence said simply. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's insane. It's also our only chance." She met each person's eyes in turn. "We have 7 months. In those 7 months, We're going to build something that's never existed before. We're going to map every road, every trail, every hiding place within 100 miles of Sacramento. We're going to identify every abolitionist, every sympathetic white person, every free black person who might help. We're going to stockpile food, clothing, money, weapons, and supplies. We're going to create false identities and freedom papers. And we're going to do all of this while maintaining perfect masks of obedience so our masters never suspect. How? Dinah asked. By thinking like chess players. Prudence said. Every piece has a role. Some of you will gather intelligence. You'll be my scouts, listening to conversations, mapping roads, identifying safe people. Some of you will gather resources, stealing small amounts of food, clothing, tools, money, anything we need, small enough amounts that masters don't notice. Some of you will be recruiters, carefully, slowly, finding other enslaved people who want freedom and are trustworthy. And some of you will be my messengers, carrying information between groups. She drew more lines on the map. Dividing the valley into sections. We organize by geography. Solomon, you handle the northern routes, anything heading toward Oregon Territory or into the foothills. Dinah, you take the western routes toward San Francisco. Moses, you handle the southern routes. Harriet, you coordinate safe houses inside Sacramento itself. Caesar, you're in charge of supplies and logistics. What about you? Solomon asked. I'm the queen, Prudence said. I coordinate everything. I make sure all the pieces move together, and I'll handle the most dangerous part, creating the distraction that lets everyone else escape. What distraction? Caesar asked. Prudence smiled, and it was not a kind smile. On the night of July 14th, the same night everyone escapes, I'm going to make sure every slave owner in this valley is too busy dealing with their own problems to organize pursuit. How? Multiple voices asked. You'll see, Prudence said. But trust me, by the time they realize what's happened, it'll be too late. For the next 3 hours they planned, Prudence assigned specific tasks to each person. They established communication protocols, coded messages left in specific locations, signal systems using colored cloth hung in windows, meeting times and places. They agreed on a command structure with clear chains of communication. Most importantly, they created a security protocol. No one person would know the complete plan except Prudence. Each group would know only their own role and their immediate contacts. If someone was captured and tortured, they couldn't betray the entire operation. It was military-level organization applied to liberation. As the meeting ended and people began to slip away into the darkness, Solomon lingered behind. You know this is impossible, right? He said quietly. Even if everything goes perfectly. Which it won't. We're talking about evacuating 60, maybe 70 people over a massive geographic area while evading professional slave catchers and armed patrols. The odds of everyone making it are better than the odds of surviving another year in bondage, Prudence finished. Solomon, my daughter was sold north to a goldfield. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's alive. But I know I'm not waiting anymore for white politicians to free us. We free ourselves. And if some of us don't make it, at least we die trying. Solomon studied her face in the moonlight. You really think like a chess player, don't you? You're willing to sacrifice pieces, including yourself, for the win. If my sacrifice means 60 people go free, it's a trade I'll make every time, Prudence said. Now go, we have work to do. Over the next 7 months, Prudence executed the most complex liberation operation in California history. The intelligence-gathering phase was meticulous. Enslaved people who worked in the city, Solomon at the blacksmith shop, Moses at the docks, a woman named Louisa who cleaned a boarding house, listened to every conversation. They learned which sheriffs were sympathetic to slavery and which were indifferent. They learned which merchants would sell to free blacks without questions. They learned the schedules of slave patrols, the routes they traveled, and the times they changed shifts. Prudence herself, on her twice-weekly shopping trips, systematically mapped Sacramento. She memorized every street, every alley, every warehouse, every stable. She noted which buildings had back entrances, which had cellars, which had attics where people could hide. Her photographic memory created a mental map more detailed than any cartographer's drawing. She also identified potential allies. California in 1849 was full of people fleeing their pasts. Failed miners, bankrupt merchants, criminals, and idealists. Some of these people hated slavery. Prudence learned to recognize them by subtle signs. A man who nodded respectfully to a free black person, a merchant who gave fair prices regardless of race, a church that welcomed all comers. One particularly valuable contact was a white man named Elijah Cooper, a Methodist minister who ran a small church in Sacramento. Cooper was an abolitionist from Massachusetts who had come west to minister to the miners. He preached that slavery was sin and refused to compromise his principles even when it cost him congregants. Prudence approached him carefully in March 1850, after attending his Sunday service with Blackwood's grudging permission. "Reverend Cooper," she said quietly after the service, while other churchgoers milled about, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately." Cooper, a thin man of 40 with intense grey eyes, nodded. They walked to the small room behind the sanctuary that served as his office. "How can I help you, sister?" he asked. Prudence took a profound risk. She dropped her mask entirely. "I need your help to free 60 people from slavery," she said, "and I need you to trust me without asking too many questions." Cooper's eyes widened, but to his credit, he didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" Over the next hour, Prudence explained, carefully revealing only what Cooper needed to know. She explained that there would be escapes. She explained that some people would need temporary shelter in Sacramento before moving on. She explained that others would need false freedom papers claiming they were free blacks from eastern states. "Can you help?" she asked. Cooper was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I came to California to do God's work. I can think of no work more godly than this. Yes, I'll help, whatever you need." He became Prudence's most valuable white ally. Through his church network, Cooper identified other abolitionists in San Francisco, San Jose, and Monterey. He created templates for freedom papers that looked official enough to pass casual inspection. He arranged for his church to serve as a temporary safe house on the night of July 14th. But Prudence's most impressive accomplishment was the supply operation. 60 people escaping simultaneously would need enormous resources: food, water, clothing, blankets, shoes, weapons, money, horses if possible. Stealing that much at once would be impossible. So Prudence organized a months-long campaign of micro-theft. Every enslaved person in the network stole something small every week: a handful of cornmeal from the pantry, an old blanket that masters wouldn't miss, a worn-out pair of boots, a few coins from a coat pocket. Individually, these thefts were undetectable. Collectively, over 7 months, they accumulated massive supplies. Solomon, working at the blacksmith shop, stole tools and materials to make crude weapons, knives from broken farm equipment, iron rods that could serve as clubs. Moses, working at the docks, accidentally damaged crates, then salvaged the contents: canvas for tents, rope, barrels that could hold water. They established hidden caches throughout the valley. An abandoned barn, 15 miles north, held dried food and blankets. A cave in the foothills 10 miles east held tools and weapons. A sympathetic free black farmer 20 miles south agreed to hide supplies in his well house. Prudence coordinated everything through her network of messengers. Information flowed constantly. The northern cache needs more dried beef. The patrol schedule changed. They now check the river road on Tuesdays. New ally identified: a merchant on J Street who'll sell to anyone. Danger. A slave catcher from Missouri arrived in town, asking questions. The operation was so complex that Prudence spent every spare moment processing information and updating plans. At night, alone in her room, she would lay out her chess pieces and move them around, simulating different scenarios, calculating probabilities, identifying weaknesses. She lost weight. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. But she never stopped. In May 1850, Prudence made a breakthrough. She recruited a man named Abraham, a skilled forger who had been enslaved to a newspaper printer. Abraham could copy any handwriting, reproduce any document. With his skills, they could create freedom papers that would fool any casual inspection. Abraham worked in secret, using stolen paper and ink, creating dozens of documents that claimed the bearers were free blacks from Ohio, New York, or Massachusetts. Each document had a different signature from a fictional official, a different seal, a different story. Anyone checking would have to write to the issuing office to verify, a process that took months. By then, Prudence calculated her people would be long gone. In June 1850, California's admission to the Union as a free state became increasingly certain. Congress was debating the Compromise of 1850, which would admit California as free while strengthening the Fugitive Slave Act in other states. Prudence realized this created both opportunity and danger. Opportunity because California statehood gave legal cover. Escaped slaves could claim they were simply free blacks living in a free state. Danger, because masters would likely try to transport their property south before statehood took effect. She accelerated her timeline. July 14, 1850, became the fixed date. 7 weeks before California would officially join the Union on September 9th. The final phase was recruitment. Prudence needed to expand beyond the original 19 conspirators. She needed everyone who wanted freedom. This was the most dangerous phase. Every new recruit was a risk. They might betray the operation intentionally or accidentally. Prudence established strict criteria. Potential recruits had to be recommended by 2 existing members. They had to demonstrate trustworthiness over months of observation. They had to understand the stakes and accept that capture meant death. By late June, the network had grown to 56 people. 56 enslaved people throughout the Sacramento Valley, all coordinating toward a single night of liberation. 56 pieces on Prudence's chessboard. Each person received specific instructions for July 14th. Some would walk. Some would ride stolen horses, some would travel by boat on the rivers. Each had a designated route, a set of landmarks to follow, and backup plans if things went wrong. The 12 primary routes were Route 1, north along the Sacramento River to Red Bluff, then into Oregon Territory, where contacts would hide people among the Native American tribes who despised slaveholders. Route 2, northeast into the Sierra Nevada foothills, to mining camps where labor shortages meant no one asked questions about a worker's past. Route 3, east to Placerville, then over the mountains into Nevada territory, betting on the chaos of the Comstock lode to provide cover. Route 4, southeast to Stockton, then into the San Joaquin Valley where Spanish and Mexican families might provide shelter. Route 5, south along the river to San Francisco, the largest city in California and home to a growing free black community. Route 6, southwest to San Francisco, but via backroads through the coastal range, avoiding main thoroughfares. Route 7, west to Benicia, then by boat across San Pablo Bay to Marin County and the ranches north of San Francisco. Route 8, northwest through the Sacramento Valley to Marysville, then westward to the coastal ranges and isolated homesteads. Route 9, staying within Sacramento itself, hiding in the city's growing free black neighborhood with false papers claiming Eastern origins. Route 10, south to San Jose, where California families still resented American takeover and might shelter refugees. Route 11, southwest to Monterrey, the old Spanish capital, where the culture was more tolerant than Anglo-Sacramento. Route 12. Into the eastern Sacramento Valley, disappearing among the farms and ranches and claiming to be recently arrived free blacks seeking agricultural work. Each route had multiple stages, safe houses, and contingency plans. Maps were committed to memory, nothing written down that could be discovered. Code words were established for different situations. The river runs red meant patrols were active. The crops are ready meant a safe house was available. Winter comes early meant abort and hide. Prudence also planned diversions. On the night of July 14th, fires would mysteriously break out in multiple locations around Sacramento, not large enough to cause serious harm, but large enough to occupy authorities and confuse pursuit. Horses would be released from corrals, wandering freely and creating chaos. False trails would be laid, leading in wrong directions. But Prudence's master stroke was psychological. She wrote letters, dozens of letters, to be delivered simultaneously on July 15th by sympathetic allies. Each letter was addressed to a slave owner whose property had escaped. Each letter contained two things: a detailed accounting of the master's crimes against the escaped individuals, and a warning. The warning was simple. If you pursue these free people into California, a free state, you will face legal prosecution, social ruin, and personal consequences. Your crimes are documented. Your neighbors know what you've done. Let them go or face justice. It was a bluff. The documentation was minimal and the neighbors mostly indifferent, but Prudence gambled that paranoia and fear of exposure would make masters hesitate long enough for trails to go cold. She also included in each letter a chess piece. A white pawn sacrificed. The message was clear: you've been played. Throughout all of this, Prudence maintained her perfect mask at Blackwood's farm. She cooked every meal, cleaned every room, smiled when appropriate, kept her eyes downcast. Blackwood never suspected. Why would he? Prudence had been perfectly obedient for 18 months, and slaves were too stupid to organize anything complex. Everyone knew that. He was so confident in Prudence's submission that he even praised her to visitors. Best cook in California, he'd boast. Absolutely docile. Never a moment's trouble. Prudence would smile and serve coffee and think about how satisfying it would be to watch his face when he discovered the truth. By early July 1850, everything was ready. 56 people prepared to move, 12 routes mapped, safe houses established, supplies cached, diversions planned, allies coordinated. All that remained was executing the most complex mass escape in American history. On July 10th, Prudence called one final meeting at the burned mill. All 56 conspirators attended, an enormous risk, but necessary. They gathered in the darkness, a community forged by shared oppression and shared hope. Prudence looked at their faces, young and old, field workers and house servants, people born in Africa and people born in America, men and women, and even a few teenagers. 56 human beings who refused to be property. 4 days, Prudence said simply. In 4 days, we take our freedom. Not ask for it, not wait for it, take it. She went through final instructions. Times, routes, contingencies, code words. Most importantly, she said, remember that we're not just escaping. We're making a statement. We're proving that enslaved people can organize, strategize, and execute complex operations that masters think are beyond us. We're proving our humanity, our intelligence, our right to freedom. What about you? Dinah asked. You've told us our routes, but not yours. Prudence smiled. I'm the last piece to move. I'm the distraction that lets everyone else get away. Don't worry about me. I've made my choices. That's not an answer, Solomon said. We're not leaving you behind, Prudence. You've organized this whole operation. You're coming with one of the groups. The Queen protects the king by sacrificing herself, Prudence replied. That's how the game works. This isn't chess, Dinah burst out. This is your life. You can't just... Yes, I can, Prudence said gently, and I will, because if I don't create a big enough distraction, some of you won't make it. The math is simple. Silence fell. Several people were crying. I'm not dying, Prudence added. At least I don't plan to, but I'm taking the biggest risk so you don't have to. That's my role. Accept it. Solomon stepped forward. Then we toast you. Every one of us who makes it owes you everything. You owe me nothing, Prudence said. You owe yourselves. You're the ones brave enough to run. I'm just the planner. They talked for another hour, going over last-minute details, sharing embraces, making promises to find each other afterward if possible. As the meeting broke up and people slipped away into the darkness, Prudence stood alone in the burned mill for a moment. She thought about Grace, somewhere north in the goldfields. She thought about her mother Patience, dead now, buried in an unmarked grave in Georgia. She thought about Timothy Whitfield, who had taught her chess and opened her mind. She thought about every indignity, every injustice, every moment of powerlessness she'd endured in 34 years of slavery. And she thought about July 14th, 4 days away, when everything would change. Checkmate, she whispered to the night. July 14th, 1850, was a Saturday. The day dawned hot and clear. Sacramento's streets were crowded with miners in town for supplies, merchants hawking goods, horses and wagons clogging the thoroughfares. It was a perfect day for chaos. Prudence woke before dawn in the slave quarters at Blackwood's farm. She performed her morning routine exactly as always, washing, dressing, walking to the kitchen to start breakfast. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. Inside, her heart hammered like a drum. She cooked breakfast: biscuits, bacon, eggs, coffee. Blackwood ate without comment, reading a newspaper with news of California's impending statehood. His wife complained about the heat. His teenage son talked about riding into Sacramento later. Normal. Everything perfectly normal. Prudence cleaned the breakfast dishes, swept the floor, prepared lunch, every action automatic, performed 1,000 times before. But this was the last time. After today, she would never cook another meal for Thurston Blackwood. After today, she would be free or dead. The morning passed slowly. Noon came. Lunch was served. Afternoon chores. Everything routine. But across the Sacramento Valley, 56 people prepared to move. Solomon at the blacksmith shop noted that his master would be occupied until late evening with a large order. He could slip away at midnight without immediate pursuit. Dinah, cleaning a boarding house, accidentally left a window unlocked for later entry. Moses, at the docks, confirmed that a boat would be unattended near the waterfront at 2 in the morning. Abraham, the forger, distributed the last set of freedom papers to designated recipients. Harriet confirmed that Reverend Cooper's church was ready to receive refugees starting at midnight. 56 people moving toward a single moment of liberation. At 6 that evening, Prudence served dinner to the Blackwood family. Roasted chicken, potatoes, greens. They ate and talked about trivial matters. The master's wife mentioned a social gathering tomorrow. The master mentioned needing to inspect the wheat field on Monday. They were making plans for a future that wouldn't happen. After dinner, Prudence cleaned the kitchen while the family retired to the parlor. She could hear them talking, laughing, normal, oblivious. At 8, she finished her work. She walked back to the slave quarters. Several other enslaved people were there. Field hands exhausted from the day's labor, an elderly woman named Clara who cooked for the workers, a young man named Daniel who tended the horses. They weren't part of the conspiracy. They'd chosen to stay, either because they were too frightened to run, or because they genuinely believed their situations would improve when California became a free state. Prudence said goodbye to them without saying goodbye. She smiled and bid them good night, as she did every evening. Then she went to her small room, closed the door, and prepared. She changed into darker clothing, a simple dress that wouldn't catch light, a shawl that could cover her head. She packed a small bag with food, water, and a knife stolen from the kitchen. She pulled out her chess set and held the Black Queen for a moment. Then she left the Queen on her bed and pocketed only one piece, the White King. When they found it later, they'd understand. She'd captured the king. Game over. At 10, Prudence slipped out of the slave quarters. The main house was dark, except for one lamp in the master's bedroom upstairs. She moved like shadow across the yard, past the barn, into the fields. She walked to a designated spot half a mile from the house where a large oak tree marked a junction between properties. There, buried under the tree, was a cache she'd prepared weeks ago, kerosene in sealed jars, rags, and matches. Prudence dug up the cache and carried it carefully to 5 separate locations around Blackwood's farm and neighboring properties. At each location, she prepared a fire that would start slowly, giving her time to get far away before flames were visible. Haystack near the barn, woodpile by the tool shed, dry grass at the edge of the wheat field, abandoned wagon filled with old cotton, storage building where extra tools were kept. She didn't want to burn down houses or hurt anyone. She wanted distraction, confusion, and symbolic destruction of property that enslaved people had been forced to build and maintain. At each location, she lit a slow-burning fuse, rags soaked in kerosene, arranged to smolder for 30 minutes before bursting into flame. By the time she finished, it was 11:30. She had time to reach Sacramento before midnight. But first, she had one more task. Prudence walked to the main house. She pulled out the letters she'd written, dozens of them, addressed to slave owners throughout the valley. Each letter contained accusations, warnings, and a white pawn. She broke into the master's study through a window she'd left unlocked earlier. She placed letters on every desk in town that needed them. Then she pinned one letter to Thurston Blackwood's bedroom door, where he'd find it in the morning. The letter read, "Master Blackwood, by the time you read this, I will be free. So will 60 of your neighbors' property. We have escaped in 12 directions simultaneously. You will not catch us. You will not recover us. California is a free state, and we claim our freedom under its laws. You sold my daughter Grace. You destroyed my family. You kept me in bondage for years, treating me as property instead of a human being created in God's image. I could have killed you for these crimes. I chose not to. I chose liberation over revenge, freedom over murder. But know this, every day you live knowing I outsmarted you. Every night you fear your remaining slaves might do the same. Every moment you wonder how a simple slave organized this. That is my revenge. You've been defeated by someone you thought was too stupid to resist. Remember that. The game is over. Checkmate. Prudence Freeman, not Prudence Blackwood. Never again, Blackwood. P.S. The fires starting around your property as you read this, those are my parting gifts. Consider them payment for 18 months of stolen labor. She left the White King chess piece beneath the letter. Then she walked out of the house she'd served for 18 months and never looked back. Prudence reached Sacramento at midnight. The city was quieter than during the day, but not empty. Saloons were open, miners drank and gambled, prostitutes called from windows. No one noticed one black woman moving through shadows. She went first to Reverend Cooper's church. The small building was dark, but when she knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more, the signal, the door opened immediately. Inside, she found chaos. 15 people had already arrived, with more coming. Families huddled together. Young men checked and rechecked their supplies. An elderly woman prayed quietly in the corner. Cooper moved among them, distributing food and water from his personal supplies, offering comfort and practical advice. "Prudence," he said when he saw her. "Thank God. I was worried." "No time," she interrupted. "Is everyone clear on their routes?" "Yes. The first group leaves in 10 minutes, heading west to Benicia. The second group leaves at 1, going south. Good. Remember, stagger the departures by at least 30 minutes. Don't let groups cluster. Over the next 3 hours, the church became a hub of controlled chaos. People arrived, rested briefly, received final instructions and supplies, then departed into the night. Prudence coordinated everything. She confirmed that each person had their freedom papers. She verified route details. She answered last-minute questions. She embraced people she'd worked with for 7 months and sent them toward freedom. Solomon arrived at 1:30 with his group, 5 people heading north. "The fires started," he said quietly. "I saw orange glow on the horizon as I came in. Half the valley's going to be trying to put out blazes by dawn." "Perfect," Prudence said. "That's 30 fewer people organizing pursuit." At 2, Moses arrived with news from the docks. "Boats ready. I've got 8 people heading to San Francisco by water. No one's watching the river tonight. Everyone's distracted." At 3, Dinah reported that her western group had departed successfully. 15 people heading toward the coast. "We've got guides meeting us at the first waypoint. Prudence, you should come with us. There's room—" "No," Prudence said. "I've got one more thing to do." "What could possibly—" "Trust me," Prudence said. She embraced Dinah. "Go, be free, tell stories about this night." By 4 in the morning, all 56 people had moved through Cooper's church and dispersed along their designated routes. 12 groups heading in 12 directions, like spokes on a wheel with Sacramento at the center. Cooper stood with Prudence in the empty church. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it. Military precision applied to liberation." "Chess precision," Prudence corrected. "Reverend, you've been invaluable, thank you." "What about you?" Cooper asked. "Where's your route?" Prudence smiled. "My route is everywhere. I need to make sure this works." She explained her final plan. For the next week she would stay in Sacramento, moving between safe houses, gathering intelligence on pursuit efforts. She would send messages to the 12 groups, warning them of danger or directing them to new safe houses if necessary. She would be the mobile coordinator, the piece that moved anywhere on the board to support others. "That's insanely dangerous," Cooper said. "Every slave catcher in California will be looking for the organizer. They'll assume, correctly, that someone coordinated this. When they figure out it was you—" "They won't," Prudence said, "because I'm going to hide in the last place they'd look, among them." She pulled out a set of clothing from her bag. Fine dress, white woman's style, a wig of straight brown hair, skin powder that would lighten her complexion slightly. "I'm going to pose as a white woman's maid," she said, "an Irish servant newly arrived in California. The accent I learned from an Irish overseer back in Charleston. It's convincing enough to fool casual inspection." Cooper stared. "That's brilliant and completely insane." "Insane would be running immediately," Prudence said. "I'm the only person who knows all 12 routes, all the contacts, all the contingencies. If I leave now, I can't coordinate if problems arise. So I stay, hidden in plain sight, until I'm sure everyone's clear. For how long? 2 weeks. That's how long it'll take for trails to go completely cold. After that, I head to San Francisco and disappear into the free black community there." Cooper shook his head in amazement. "You've thought of everything." "I'm a chess player," Prudence said. "I always think 12 moves ahead." They said goodbye. Cooper promised to keep gathering intelligence and pass it along through their network. Prudence slipped out of the church as dawn approached. Sacramento woke to chaos. Fires burned at a dozen farms. Blackwood's property had sustained significant damage. The tool she'd destroyed, the woodpile consumed, the haystack near the barn reduced to ash. Neighboring properties reported similar incidents. And then the discoveries began. Masters woke to find slaves gone. Not just 1 or 2, but entire groups. At some farms, every enslaved person had vanished. The realization spread like wildfire. By noon, the entire valley knew this wasn't a few random escapes. This was organized, coordinated mass liberation. And then the letters were found. Thurston Blackwood was among the first to discover his. He pinned to his bedroom door with a white chess piece beneath it. He read it 3 times, his face turning progressively redder before shouting for his overseer. 20 other masters received similar letters. The details varied, but the message was consistent. Your crimes are documented, your property is gone, and you've been outsmarted by people you thought were too stupid to resist. The white pawns, chess pieces left as calling cards, drove home the message with devastating symbolism. By afternoon, Sacramento's sheriff's office was overwhelmed. 30 slave owners demanded immediate action. They wanted posses formed. They wanted slave catchers hired. They wanted blood. But the authorities faced an impossible situation. 56 people gone in 12 directions. No clear trails. The early pursuit groups reported that tracks split and split again, leading everywhere and nowhere. Some trails ended at rivers where boats had obviously been used. Others ended in hard rock where tracking was impossible. Others led into Sacramento itself and vanished among the city's population. Worse, the legal situation was murky. California hadn't officially become a state yet, but statehood was weeks away. Did territorial slave codes still apply? Could they legally pursue escaped slaves into California when it was about to be free? What if the escaped people claimed to be free blacks from eastern states? The letters complicated everything. They contained enough specific details about abuses that some masters feared publicity. What if a trial exposed their crimes? What if newspapers printed the accusations? Fear and paranoia set in. Masters who still held enslaved people watched them with new suspicion. Had their slaves been part of the conspiracy? Were they planning similar escapes? Could they be trusted? Some masters decided to cut their losses. They sold their remaining property quickly, getting what money they could before California statehood eliminated the market. Others increased security dramatically, chaining slaves at night, restricting movement, hiring more overseers. But dozens of masters did exactly what Prudence had gambled they would. They hesitated, they debated. They argued about the best course of action, and while they debated, trails went cold. Prudence spent the next 2 weeks in Sacramento, moving between safe houses, disguised as an Irish maid. She listened to conversations in shops and saloons. She read newspapers. She gathered intelligence from her remaining network contacts. The reports were encouraging. The northern group had reached Red Bluff successfully. The San Francisco groups had arrived in the city and dispersed into the free black community. The mountain groups had found work in mining camps. The southern groups had reached San Jose and Monterey. There were some close calls. One group was nearly caught crossing the Sacramento River, but darkness and chaos let them escape. Another group was questioned by a patrol, but their false freedom papers held up under inspection. By the end of July, Prudence was confident. All 56 people had reached their initial destinations. Some would move again, creating false trails and new identities. But the immediate danger had passed. On August 1st, 1850, Prudence removed her disguise, changed back into clothing appropriate for a free black woman, and boarded a boat to San Francisco. She arrived in the city 3 days later. San Francisco in 1850 was raw, chaotic, and full of possibility. The gold rush had created a population of 100,000 people, many of them transient, most of them willing to overlook the past if you worked hard and paid your debts. The free black community was small but growing, perhaps 300 people, clustered in an area near the docks. Former slaves who'd purchased their freedom, free blacks who'd migrated from eastern states, a few who'd escaped bondage and established new identities. Prudence found them within a day of arriving. A Baptist church served as the community center. She walked in on a Sunday service and sat in the back pew. After the service, the minister, a free black man named Reverend Daniel Washington, approached her. "Welcome, sister. New to San Francisco?" "Yes," Prudence said. "Recently arrived from Sacramento." Washington's eyes widened slightly. "From Sacramento? Then you've heard about the mass escape?" Prudence smiled. "I've heard." Something in her tone made Washington study her more carefully. Then he smiled. "I see. Well, sister, I think we should talk privately." In Washington's small office, Prudence told her story. Not all of it. She'd learned to be careful, but enough. Washington listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. 56 people, he finally said, all in one night, organized like a military operation, and you were the coordinator? "I prefer chess player," Prudence said. "Military sounds too masculine." Washington laughed. "Sister, you've done something remarkable. Those 56 people, do you know what they're calling it already? The Sacramento 56. The story's spreading through the Underground Railroad network. You've become a legend." "I don't want to be a legend," Prudence said. "I want to be free, and I want to help others be free." "Then you've come to the right place," Washington said. "San Francisco needs organizers. There are still people trapped in illegal bondage throughout California. The Underground Railroad is trying to establish Western routes, but we need experienced coordinators. Someone who understands logistics, strategy, security. Someone who plays chess," Prudence finished. "Exactly." Over the next months, Prudence established herself in San Francisco. She found work as a seamstress, her skills with needle and thread, learned in slavery, now earning her wages. She rented a small room in a boarding house. She attended church regularly and became part of the free black community, but her real work happened in secret. Prudence became the Western coordinator for the Underground Railroad, helping establish routes from California to Canada, from Nevada to San Francisco, from Texas to Mexico. She trained others in her methods: intelligence gathering, resource pooling, coordinated timing, strategic deception. She never forgot that she was a chess player. Every liberation operation was a game with human lives as stakes. Every successful escape was a piece moved to safety. Every slave owner thwarted was an enemy piece removed from the board. By 1852, Prudence had helped free over 200 people from illegal bondage in California and neighboring territories. Her network stretched from San Diego to the Oregon border. Her reputation grew, though few knew her real name. She operated under aliases, never staying in one identity too long. But she never found Grace. Prudence spent countless hours tracking leads, sending messages north to mining camps, offering rewards for information. Nothing. Grace had vanished into the goldfields with Josiah Pemberton. And the goldfields swallowed people like the ocean swallowed ships. It was the one piece Prudence couldn't protect, the one move she couldn't plan around, the one failure that haunted her every day. In 1853, something extraordinary happened. Abraham, the forger who'd been part of the original conspiracy, arrived in San Francisco with news. "I found her," he said without preamble. "I found Grace." Prudence's heart stopped. "Where is she?" "Alive," Abraham said quickly. "She's alive. She's in a mining camp near Nevada City. I was working there, making maps for miners, and I heard about a girl working in a boarding house. Black girl, about 12 years old, name of Grace. I asked around carefully. It's her, Prudence. It's your daughter." Prudence left San Francisco the next morning. Nevada City was 150 miles northeast, deep in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The journey took 5 days by stage and horseback. Prudence barely slept, her mind racing with calculations and fears and desperate hope. What if Abraham was wrong? What if it was a different Grace? What if the girl was her daughter, but no longer remembered her mother? What if... She forced herself to think like a chess player, plan for every contingency, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Nevada City was a rough mining town of 5,000 people, built on steep hillsides where gold had been discovered in the gravels. Miners worked claims up and down the creeks. Merchants sold supplies at inflated prices. Saloons and brothels operated openly. It was loud, dirty, and chaotic. Abraham had given Prudence the name of the boarding house, Caldwell's, on Main Street. She found it easily, a 2-story wooden building that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Prudence walked through the front door. A white woman in her 40s, presumably Mrs. Caldwell, looked up from the front desk. "Help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for work," Prudence said, maintaining her cover. "I heard you might need a cook or cleaning woman." "Might," Mrs. Caldwell said, looking Prudence up and down. "You know your way around a kitchen?" "Yes, ma'am, 20 years' experience." "Well, I've already got a girl doing cooking and cleaning, but she could use help. Business is good right now. Lots of miners boarding. You can start tomorrow if the pay suits you." "May I meet the girl?" Prudence asked, her voice somehow steady despite her racing heart. "I like to know who I'll be working with." "Grace," Mrs. Caldwell called toward the back of the building. "Come out here a minute." Footsteps, a door opening, and then she was there. Grace. 12 years old now, 4 years since Prudence had last held her. Taller, thinner, but alive, wearing a simple dress and apron, hair pulled back in braids, face showing the wariness of someone who'd learned to be cautious. Their eyes met. For a moment, Grace's face was blank, not recognizing the woman in front of her. Then her eyes widened, her mouth opened. She took a step forward, stopped, looked at Mrs. Caldwell, then back at Prudence. Prudence gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet, not here." Grace understood immediately. She'd learned survival, too. "Yes, ma'am," Grace said to Mrs. Caldwell, her voice carefully neutral. "This is—" "I didn't catch your name." "Sarah," Prudence said. "Sarah Johnson." "Sarah here might be helping you with the cooking and cleaning. Show her around, will you? I need to step out for supplies." Mrs. Caldwell left. The moment the door closed behind her, Grace ran across the room and crashed into Prudence's arms. They stood together, holding each other, both crying silently. 4 years of separation, terror, hope, and desperate searching collapsed into a single embrace. "Mama," Grace whispered. "Mama, I thought you were dead. Pemberton said you were dead. He said Master Blackwood sold you south and—" "I'm here," Prudence said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I'm here now, and I'm never letting you go again." They had only minutes before Mrs. Caldwell might return. Prudence quickly explained what had happened: the mass escape, the network, San Francisco, the search. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not enslaved," Grace said urgently. "Pemberton died. Cholera 2 years ago. Before he died, he told Mrs. Caldwell I was a free girl whose parents were dead and she should take care of me. He must have felt guilty or something, so I've been working here, but for wages. Mrs. Caldwell's not cruel, Mama. She doesn't know I was enslaved. She thinks I'm free." Prudence felt a weight lift she hadn't known she was carrying. Grace was legally free. No master to claim her, no papers to forge, no dramatic rescue needed. Just a mother and daughter, reunited. "Then we're going home," Prudence said. "To San Francisco, today, if possible." "But Mrs. Caldwell, I'll tell her your aunt found you and needs you in San Francisco. I'll pay her for any wages owed. Grace, we're leaving together. I've waited 4 years for this. I'm not waiting another day." Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I dreamed about this. Every night I dreamed you'd come." 2 hours later, they left Nevada City on the southbound stage. Mrs. Caldwell had been surprised, but understanding, especially when Prudence paid double the wages Grace was owed. During the 5-day journey back to San Francisco, mother and daughter talked endlessly. Grace told stories of her time with Pemberton, harsh, brutal stories, but she'd survived. Prudence told stories of the mass escape, the network, the 200 people freed. "You did that?" Grace asked, amazed. "You organized all that?" "I did it for you," Prudence said. "Everything I did. Every risk I took was so you could be free, so all of us could be free." "Tell me again about the night of the escape," Grace said. "Tell me about the chess pieces and the letters and the fires." Prudence told the story. Grace listened with fierce pride in her eyes. "You're the chess mistress," Grace said. "That's what they should call you. Not just Prudence, not just your name. The chess mistress of California." Prudence smiled. "I like that. The chess mistress, though I prefer to think of myself as the queen who protected her king." "What king?" "You," Prudence said simply. "You were always my king, the peace I was protecting. Everything else was just strategy to keep you safe." They arrived in San Francisco in mid-August 1853. Prudence brought Grace to the boarding house where she lived, introduced her to the free black community, enrolled her in a school run by abolitionists. Grace thrived. She learned to read and write, skills her mother had never had the chance to teach her during their time together in bondage. She made friends, she laughed, she became a child again instead of a survivor. And Prudence continued her work, coordinating escapes, building networks, moving pieces on an ever-expanding chessboard. By 1860, when tensions between North and South exploded into civil war, Prudence had helped free over 500 people from bondage. Her network stretched across the entire West. Her methods had been studied and replicated by other abolitionists. When the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, Prudence was 48 years old. She'd lived half her life in slavery and half in freedom. She'd lost her childhood, her mother, and 4 years with her daughter. She'd risked death dozens of times, but she'd won, not just her own freedom, but the freedom of hundreds of others. The game was over. Checkmate. Prudence lived until 1892, dying at age 77 in San Francisco. Grace, by then a schoolteacher and mother of 3, held her hand as she passed. "Tell them stories," Prudence whispered in her final moments. "Tell them about the people who fought. Tell them about the chess game we played. Tell them we were never property, never slaves in our souls, always free people, just waiting for our chance to take our freedom back," Grace promised, and she kept that promise. The story of the Sacramento 56 spread through oral tradition, passed from generation to generation. Some details were lost or changed over time, but the core truth remained. In 1850, 56 enslaved people vanished from California's Central Valley in 12 coordinated escape routes, organized by a woman who thought like a chess player and moved like a queen. Historical records confirm parts of the story. Court documents mention mass disappearances of slaves in Sacramento County in July 1850. Newspaper articles from the period reference organized escapes and criminal conspiracies among the colored population. Letters found in historical archives match some details of the warnings Prudence sent. But much of the operation happened in shadow, documented only in oral histories and the memories of those who lived it. Today, historians recognize the Sacramento 56 as one of the most sophisticated escape operations in American slavery history. The coordination, the strategic planning, the simultaneous execution, it was unprecedented. And at the center of it all was Prudence, whose story reminds us that resistance takes many forms. Not all heroes fight with weapons. Some fight with intelligence, patience, and strategy. Some win by thinking 12 moves ahead. In chess, the queen is the most powerful piece. She protects the king, moves in all directions, and can single-handedly change the course of the game. Prudence was that queen, and her chessboard was freedom itself. The legacy of the Sacramento 56 extends far beyond that one night in July 1850. The operation proved that enslaved people could organize complex, multi-stage operations that rivaled any military or political campaign. It proved that intelligence and strategy could defeat brute force and legal oppression. It proved that patience could be revolutionary. For the 56 people who escaped, life in freedom was not easy. They faced racism, poverty, and the constant fear of recapture under the Fugitive Slave Act. But they were free. They built lives, raised families, established communities, and never forgot the woman who coordinated their liberation. Several participants in the escape later wrote memoirs or gave interviews. Solomon, who lived until 1908, wrote, "Prudence taught us that we were not inferior. She proved we could outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver the system that enslaved us. She was a genius, and she was ours." Dinah, who settled in San Francisco and became an activist for women's suffrage, said in an 1892 interview, "People ask me where I learned to organize political campaigns. I tell them from the chess Mistress of California. Everything I know about strategy, I learned watching Prudence coordinate our freedom." The white community's reaction to the Sacramento 56 was mixed. Some newspaper editorials praised the ingenuity and determination of the escaped slaves. Others condemned the criminal conspiracy and called for harsher laws. But no one denied that something extraordinary had happened. One Sacramento newspaper wrote in August 1850, "We are forced to acknowledge that the recent mass escape demonstrates capabilities among the colored population that many have long denied. The organization, timing, and execution of this operation would do credit to any military commander. If this is what determined slaves can accomplish, what might free colored people achieve?" It was a question that terrified some Americans and inspired others. For slave owners throughout California, the Sacramento 56 had profound effects. Many immediately increased security measures. Some sold their slaves rather than risk similar escapes. A few, though only a few, were moved by the letters Prudence sent and reconsidered their participation in slavery. Thurston Blackwood never recovered from the humiliation. The fires that destroyed parts of his property cost him thousands of dollars. The escape of Prudence became a local legend that mocked his claim to be a competent master. He sold his remaining enslaved people within weeks and moved back to South Carolina in 1851, abandoning California forever. His farm was eventually bought by a free black family who turned it into a successful wheat operation. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. For California's free black community, the Sacramento 56 became a source of pride and inspiration. The story was told and retold, growing in mythic proportions. Prudence became a folk hero, her name spoken with reverence. But Prudence herself always remained humble about her role. In a rare interview given in 1885, she said, "I was just one person doing what needed to be done. The real heroes were the 56 people who risked everything to run. I just helped them see the path. They had the courage to take it." When pressed about her chess strategies, she explained, "Chess teaches you to see the whole board, not just one piece. It teaches you that every piece has value, even pawns. It teaches you patience. Sometimes you must wait 20 moves for the right opportunity. And it teaches you that the queen, though powerful, exists to serve the king. My king was freedom. Everything else was just tactics." The interviewer asked if she had any regrets. Prudence was silent for a long moment. "Only one," she finally said. "I wish I could have moved faster. I wish I could have freed more people before they suffered. Every day I delayed planning. Every week I spent gathering supplies. Someone was being beaten or raped or killed. I saved 56 people in one night, but hundreds of others remained in bondage for years after. Those are the pieces I couldn't protect. Those are the games I couldn't win." She paused, then added, "But I learned something important. You can't win every game, but you must play. You must always play, because even one piece moved to safety, even one person freed, makes the game worth playing." In her final years, Prudence worked with grace to document the stories of as many Sacramento 56 participants as possible. They interviewed survivors, collected letters, and created a record that would eventually be archived at the California Historical Society. One of those survivors, a man named Caesar who had been 19 during the escape, wrote in his memoir, "Miss Prudence taught us that our minds were our greatest weapons. Master could chain our bodies but not our thoughts. She showed us that intelligence, strategy, and patience could break any chain. For that, I honor her memory every day." The broader impact of the Sacramento 56 rippled across America. Abolitionists in the East heard the story and were inspired. Frederick Douglass mentioned the operation in a speech in 1851, calling it proof that enslaved people possess the same intellectual capacities as any white man and superior moral courage. Harriet Tubman, the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad, reportedly said, "I've made 13 trips south and brought back hundreds of people. But Prudence moved 56 in one night. That's a kind of genius I can only admire." The operation also influenced tactical thinking in other liberation efforts. The concept of simultaneous coordinated escapes in multiple directions became a strategy employed by other Underground Railroad organizers. The use of false papers, diversionary tactics, and safe house networks, all refined by Prudence, became standard practices. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Sacramento 56 was psychological. It shattered the myth that enslaved people were incapable of complex planning and organization. It proved that oppressed people could resist systematically, strategically, and successfully. For every enslaved person who heard the story, it was a spark of hope. If 56 people could escape simultaneously, maybe others could too. If one woman with no formal education could outmaneuver an entire system of oppression, maybe others had untapped potential waiting to be unleashed. The chess mistress of California became more than a historical figure. She became a symbol of what was possible when intelligence met opportunity, when patience met courage, when strategy met moral purpose. Today, historians study the Sacramento 56 as a case study in resistance movements. Military academicians analyze Prudence's tactics as examples of asymmetric warfare, how a vastly outmatched opponent can achieve victory through intelligence and strategy. Business schools examine her logistical planning and coordination as models of complex organizational management. But beyond academic interest, the story remains deeply personal for many African Americans. It's a story about ancestors who refused to accept oppression, about people who risked everything for freedom, about the power of the mind to overcome physical bondage. In Sacramento today, a historical marker stands near the site where the old burned mill once stood. It reads, "Here, in December 1849, Prudence Freeman and 19 other enslaved people held the first planning meeting for what would become known as the Sacramento 56, the largest coordinated mass escape in California history. On July 14, 1850, 56 enslaved people simultaneously escaped along 12 routes, overwhelming authorities and achieving freedom. This operation, organized by Freeman with the precision of a chess master, demonstrated that enslaved people possessed the same intelligence, strategic capability, and determination as any free person. It stands as testament to the power of human ingenuity in the face of oppression and the unquenchable desire for freedom. Every year on July 14th, descendants of the Sacramento 56 gather at this marker to honor their ancestors. They tell the stories, they remember the names, they celebrate the victory, and they teach their children about the chess mistress of California, the enslaved woman who thought 12 moves ahead and changed history. Prudence's story reminds us that history is not made only by presidents, generals, and politicians. It's made by ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice, by people who see a chessboard where others see only prison walls, by people who turn patience into power and intelligence into liberation. In a system designed to crush human dignity, Prudence preserved hers and helped 56 others do the same. In a society that claimed enslaved people were intellectually inferior, she proved otherwise through actions that spoke louder than any words. She was a cook, a mother, a chess player, a genius, a liberator. She was the queen who moved in all directions, protected her king, and checkmated an entire system of oppression. And her legacy lives on every time someone chooses to resist oppression through intelligence rather than violence, through strategy rather than rage, through patience rather than despair. The game of freedom is never truly over. There are always new pieces to move, new strategies to develop, new opponents to outmaneuver. But the chess mistress of California showed us how to play. And her lesson is simple: never accept bondage, never stop thinking, never stop planning. Never give up hope, because in the end, intelligence and determination can defeat even the most powerful oppression. Checkmate.